Your baby already knew your voice before they were born. Not as a memory, not as a feeling, as a precise, measurable neurological imprint, recorded in the brain before the eyes ever opened, before the lungs ever took a single breath of air. Scientists have confirmed it, and the mechanism behind it will change the way you understand everything that happens in those first weeks outside the womb. Here's what almost no one tells you. The womb is not a quiet place. It is one of the loudest, most acoustically complex environments your baby will ever experience. There is a constant rush of blood moving through the placenta. There is the low rhythmic drumbeat of your heart. There are your intestines at work, your lungs expanding and contracting, every swallow, every movement, all of it transmitted as sound through amniotic fluid. And layered over all of that, arriving louder and clearer than any external sound can reach. That is what your baby was listening to for months. Not silence, not muffled noise, a living, layered soundscape with your voice at the center of it. And what researchers at the University of Helsinki and the Auditory Neuroscience Lab at Northwestern University have confirmed is that the fetal auditory system doesn't just detect these sounds. It processes them, it organizes them, it learns from them. By the time your baby arrives, something has already been built inside their brain, specifically because of what they heard. And you were the one who built it. If you want to understand why your newborn turns toward you the instant you speak, if you want to understand why your voice calms them in a way nothing else can replicate, if you want to understand what actually happened inside the womb during those months you were simply living your life, stay here. Because this is one of the most extraordinary things developmental science has ever uncovered about the beginning of human life. Now, before we go deeper, if you are watching this and your partner is not, send it to them right now. What you are about to learn is not something one parent should carry alone. This is the kind of science that belongs to both of you. The story of fetal hearing begins much earlier than most people assume. The auditory system begins forming at around 16 weeks of gestation. By 25 weeks, roughly midway through the third trimester, the cochlea, the inner ear structure responsible for converting sound vibrations into nerve signals, is structurally complete. The connections between the inner ear and the auditory cortex in the brain are actively forming. And by 28 weeks, research has confirmed that fetuses respond to external sound stimuli with measurable changes in heart rate and movement. This is not reflex. This is response. There is a difference, and the difference matters enormously. A reflex is automatic. It requires no learning, no memory, no comparison against previous experience. A response means the brain has received input, evaluated it against something it has already stored, and produced a specific output. By 28 weeks, your baby was already doing the second thing, already comparing, already recognizing patterns, already building a sound map of the world, a world they had never seen but had been listening to for months. Now, here is where the science becomes something closer to astonishing. Researchers at the University of Florida published a study in which pregnant women in their third trimester were asked to read the same short children's story aloud every day for 6 weeks. After birth, days after birth, those newborns were tested using a non-nutritive sucking paradigm, a method that measures how hard a baby sucks on a pacifier in response to different audio stimuli. When they heard recordings of that specific story, the one they had heard repeatedly in the womb, their sucking patterns changed in a measurable way. They responded differently to that story than to a story they had never heard before. They recognized it, not as something vague or approximate, as something specific and familiar. A story they had never seen, never touched, never experienced with any sense except sound. Think about what that means. Think about the story you read out loud more than once during pregnancy. The song you sang without thinking about it. The television show you watched every night. The voice of the person who sat beside you on the couch for 9 months and talked to you every day. Your baby was cataloging all of it, filing it, building something. But what exactly were they building? This is the part that Dr. Sarah Bloom, a researcher in perinatal auditory neuroscience, describes as the foundation of early social cognition. Not the ability to recognize a song or a story, although that is remarkable enough on its own. The deeper capacity being built was this: the ability to distinguish one voice from all other voices, to extract a single signal from a complex acoustic environment and assign it special significance. To know before language, before visual recognition, before any postnatal experience, that this specific voice is the most important sound in the world. The mechanism is called prosodic imprinting. Prosody is the music of speech, the rhythm, the melody, the stress patterns, the rises and falls in pitch that are unique to every person's voice. Not the words, not the meaning, the music. And what research from the Karolinska Institute in Stockholm has shown is that fetuses become attuned specifically to the prosodic signature of the mother's voice during the final trimester. The pitch range, the typical rhythm, the characteristic melody of how she speaks. These patterns are encoded in the developing auditory cortex with a degree of specificity that researchers describe, in their own published language, as striking. It is why, in the delivery room, in the chaos of those first seconds after birth, a newborn will turn their head toward their mother's voice. Not because she is close, not because her voice is the loudest, because that voice is already neurologically familiar, because the brain recognizes a pattern it has been storing for weeks. Before your baby ever saw your face, they already knew your voice from every other voice in the world. And here is where it gets even more specific. Because the womb does something to sound that most people have never thought about. Sound does not travel through amniotic fluid the way it travels through air. The physical properties of fluid transmission change the acoustic characteristics of everything that enters the womb from the outside. High-frequency components are dampened. The world outside sounds muffled, attenuated, stripped of its upper registers. Which means that voices coming from outside the mother's body, the father's voice, the voices of other family members, music played near the belly, arrive at the fetal ear at a lower volume and with different acoustic properties than the sounds that originate from within. External voices are present. The mother's voice, however, travels a different route. It reaches the fetus not only through the air and through the abdominal wall, but also through bone conduction, the vibration of the mother's bones and tissues transmitting sound directly to the amniotic fluid with significantly less attenuation. Her voice arrives fuller, richer, more intact. This is not a metaphor for emotional closeness. It is a physical, acoustic fact. The mother's voice literally sounds different to the fetus than any other voice. It sounds closer. It sounds more complete. And over months of repeated exposure, the brain codes it as the primary reference point for what a safe, familiar voice sounds like. This is why, when researchers test newborn voice preference in the first hours of life, the results are not ambiguous. Studies published in the journal Developmental Science have found that newborns, tested within hours of birth before any significant postnatal interaction, will consistently orient toward recordings of their own mother's voice over the voice of an unfamiliar female speaker. The preference is present before they have had any significant time to learn it after birth. It was already there, already built, already waiting. And this brings us to the question almost nobody thinks to ask. What about everything else they heard? What about the ambient sounds, the music, the voices of others, the texture of sound that filled those months? What did the brain do with all of that? The answer involves a process that researchers call auditory scene analysis, the brain's capacity to separate a complex acoustic environment into meaningful components, to figure out which sounds belong together, which sounds matter, and which sounds can be safely treated as background. Fetuses begin developing this capacity before birth. The brain is not a passive receiver of sound. It is an active organizer. And the organizing principle it uses, the way it decides what matters, is statistical regularity. The sounds that appear most often, in the most consistent patterns, are the ones that get flagged as significant. The sounds that are irregular, unpredictable, or rare are filed differently. This is why the mother's heartbeat has a specific calming effect on newborns that other rhythmic sounds approximate, but never quite replicate. The heartbeat is not just a sound. It is the most statistically regular acoustic event the fetus ever experiences, present in every waking moment, in every sleeping moment, for the entire duration of development. The brain does not just register it. The brain uses it as a baseline, as the default rhythm against which everything else is measured. After birth, when a newborn hears a sound pattern similarly to that baseline, the nervous system recognizes it, not as memory, as something closer to home. Nora was 7 weeks postpartum when she first heard about this research. Her daughter, Ellie, had been difficult to settle at night, not in a way that concerned the pediatrician, just in the ordinary, exhausting way of new babies who have no agreed-upon relationship with sleep. A friend sent her a study. She read it, then she did something that felt a little strange at first. She began placing her hand on her own chest while she held Ellie, so that her daughter's ear was resting near her heart. She hummed, not a song, just a low, rhythmic sound that approximated the pace of her heartbeat. Ellie settled within minutes. Not every time, but more often than not. And Nora told her partner that she hadn't done anything clever. She had just given Ellie back something she already recognized. That is the practical core of this science, and it matters more than any tip in any parenting book. Your baby is not arriving as a blank slate looking for information. Your baby is arriving as someone who already has a reference library, built from sound, and who is actively searching for the things in this new world that match what's already inside. Your job in those early weeks is not to teach. It is to be recognizable, to show up as the version of yourself that their brain already knows. Your voice, your rhythm, your presence. Researchers at the University of British Columbia have studied the effect of maternal speech on newborn cortisol regulation, the hormonal system associated with stress response. What they found is that the sound of the mother's voice, even recorded and played without her physical presence, produces measurable reductions in cortisol in infants under 6 months. The effect is not identical to physical contact, but it is real, it is biochemical, and it is specific to the voice the baby already knew before birth. The brain does not process the mother's voice as just pleasant or familiar. It processes it as a regulatory signal, a cue that says, the environment is safe, you can lower your defenses. Think about that the next time you wonder whether talking to your baby matters, whether narrating what you are doing while you fold laundry or make coffee actually accomplishes anything. It does not just accomplish something. It does something specific, in a specific system with a specific biological effect. Your voice is not background noise to your baby. It is the most meaningful sound in their sensory world. And here is what researchers found in the follow-up work, the part that almost no one expects. The prenatal sound imprinting is not limited to voice recognition. It extends to emotional prosody, the tone that carries emotion, the rise in pitch that signals warmth, the lower, slower cadence that signals calm. Fetuses do not understand words, they understand tone. And the tone patterns they are exposed to in the womb become the emotional vocabulary their brain uses to interpret communication after birth. Studies from the Max Planck Institute for Human Cognitive and Brain Sciences have shown that the crying patterns of newborns, the melody of how a baby cries, reflect the prosodic patterns of their native language. German newborns cry with a different melodic contour than French newborns. The difference maps onto the prosodic characteristics of the language the mother spoke during pregnancy. The baby is not crying in a language, but the brain has already been shaped by one. The sound has already left a mark. What this tells us is something that goes far beyond hearing. It tells us that communication begins before birth, that the relationship between parent and child, real, neurologically grounded, measurable relationship, exists before the first breath is taken outside the womb. The baby has already been listening, already been learning, already been forming at the most fundamental level an understanding of who you are, not through words, not through vision, through the accumulated, repeated, unmistakable sound of you. If you have a newborn right now, and you have been speaking to them, reading to them, singing to them, even quietly, even when you were unsure whether it mattered, it mattered. It is still mattering. You are not building something new. You are continuing something that started months ago without you even knowing it was a project. You have been your baby's primary learning environment since the second trimester. You have been doing the most important developmental work of their life without any credentials, any training, or any preparation. And you have been doing it correctly because you are simply present and you kept showing up. Pause for a moment. Think about all the ordinary days of that pregnancy. The mornings you talked through your plans for the day. The evenings when you sat quietly and put your hand on your stomach. The car rides and the phone calls and the meals and the hours you spent not doing anything in particular. Your baby was there for all of it, absorbing, processing, building something they would carry into the world and use before they ever open their eyes. If someone in your life is expecting a baby and has never heard this, send them this video. Not as trivia, not as something interesting to know, but because it changes what those months mean. It changes what presence means. It changes what showing up means. The science is real, it is replicated, and it deserves to be in the hands of every parent before the baby arrives, not after. And for you, right now, with the baby you have, understand that you are not starting from zero. Neither is your baby. The conversation between you began before this moment, before the hospital, before the name was chosen. It began in the dark, in the middle of an ordinary Tuesday, when your baby heard your voice for the first time, and the brain did what brains do. It listened, it stored, it recognized, and it began to know you. That knowing is still happening. Every time you speak, every time you hum, every time you pick them up and hold them close enough that they can feel the vibration of your voice in your chest. You are not just comforting your baby. You are continuing the longest conversation they have ever had, the one that started before they could tell anyone it was happening. This is the science your baby cannot tell you themselves. This is what was happening on the inside while you were living on the outside. And now that you know it, really know it, with the research behind it, nothing about those early weeks will ever look quite the same. If this changed how you see those first days, leave a comment below. Tell us what it means to you, or share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if there is something about your newborn's behavior that science has never explained to you clearly, that question belongs here too. This channel exists for exactly that reason.